what it means to be Palestinian wherever you are has largely been defined by Nakba. What 48 has signified for Palestinians: dispossession, exile, slaughter, massacre, and ongoing Nakba. The idea that the catastrophe of 48 hasn't ended. The idea that genocide in Gaza today is the inevitable ending of Zionism. Zionism will not end until it carries out full genocide, because, right, that's what Nakba is. It's erasing us. It's genociding us. It's right. So it's the logical end to the end of Zionism. What my book offers is that Nakba, it didn't start in 48.
Right.
The forced expulsion, the forced exclusion, the forced distancing of Palestinians from the land started 30 years prior. So that same category of Nakba can still define the Palestinian experience, but it didn't start in 48. It started earlier. And therefore, in 48, what Israel managed to do was just continue a legacy that the British had in place for. There was precedence for 48, right? There was legal precedence for distancing Palestinians and keeping them in refugee camps and treating them as outside of international law. Not applying international law to Palestinians predated 48. But at this point, I think what it means to be Palestinian in the world is about more than Palestinians themselves, and it's about more than Nakba. It's about injustice. Period.
Joined today by Nadim Bawalsa. Thank you so much for taking the time. You're the author of Transnational Palestine: Migration and the Right of Return Before 1948, published by Stanford University Press in 2022. I would encourage everyone to read that book. It looks at Palestinian nationalism and identity before the founding of the State of Israel in 1948 and what we officially know as the start of the Nakba. Nadim argues it goes back long before that. He's the associate editor with the Journal of Palestine Studies, a historian of modern Palestine. His other work has appeared in the Jerusalem Quarterly, the Journal of Palestine Studies, the NACLA Report on the Americas, and he earned a joint doctorate in history and Middle Eastern and Islamic studies from New York University. In 2017, he's got a master's in Arab studies from Georgetown University's Center for Contemporary Arab Studies, graduating from there in 2010. I think to start off today, since I just finished the book, and we've got a lot of questions we're going to be getting to, but if you could maybe just give us a little history. What was the specific impetus or reason that compelled you to write this book?
So when I started the PhD, my focus was really to write a sort of like a social history of Palestinians.
Right.
Whether it's an intellectual history or like a history based on autobiographical sources, diaries, letters. I wanted to write the stories of Palestinians. And the period I had always been fascinated by was the 30 years immediately preceding 48. So the British mandate in Palestine, or the British occupation of Palestine, that started December 1917 and ended on May 14th, 1948. I had really, I had done a lot of reading into this period of Palestinian history, and it became very clear that what was missing largely was a history of the people of this land as their lands were being taken away, as Jews were settling Palestine between, in the 1920s and 30s. What was happening, not from the lens of the nationalist movement or the let's say the elites of this history, right? Yeah. The ones, the Nashashibis, the Husseinis, the big Palestinian names in this history. So I really wanted to sort of unearth any documents I could from the Palestinians themselves and, our mothers' families from Jerusalem. So I was always fascinated by Jerusalem and sort of locating or re-narrating history of Jerusalem through family documents, personal records, whatever I could find. So in 2011, I went to Jerusalem to do preliminary dissertation research, and I went to the Israel State Archive. I spent a few very, very frustrating days in there, weeks actually, and found very few documents that spoke to peoplehood, let's say, or like the experience of Palestinians at this time. Part of it had to do with a dearth of sources, right? Israel, once upon its establishment, erased many Palestinian records or confiscated and subsequently sort of hid or concealed many of the documents that otherwise would be in a national archive, right? But another reason is that they were so scattered. There was so much disorganization in the way the archivists had organized the archive that you could not all of it was digitized yet in 2011. So you could type up whatever source you were looking for, whatever keywords you were looking for, and you would find documents in all sorts of random boxes that had nothing to do with Palestinians. So it was very hard and very frustrating for several days to try to find anything to do with sort of personal records of Palestinians. And then I was there with a friend who was at NYU with me as well, doing his research, dissertation research. And he came up to me one day with a document that said, and he said to me, Nadim, can you decipher this handwriting? Because it's in Arabic, and I'm pretty sure that says Mexico. And I said, what? So I looked at the document, and it was the letterhead said Centro Social Palestino de Monterrey, Mexico.
Right.
In Latin alphabet. So, and it was printed. So I said, yes. So that clearly says Mexico. And then he said, but the document itself, the written part, the handwritten part in Arabic was Palestinians in Mexico in 1927, Monterrey, Mexico, demanding a right of return or demanding or asking for help from the Arab executive, from the nationalist movement, from the leadership of the nationalist movement in Jerusalem, to secure their rights to Palestinian nationality from the British. And he said, is that really what it says? I mean, he said, I'm pretty sure that's what it says. He's not a native Arabic speaker, but he could read Arabic. And he said, I'm pretty sure that says Mexico and that says, so on and so on. I said, that's absolutely what it says. What is this? How come there were Palestinians in Mexico in 1927? Why was there letterhead printed for this Centro Social, like this social center of Palestinians in Mexico? Mm-hmm. And what is this narrative of demanding rights to nationality and a right to return to Palestine as Palestinians in 1927? This sounds very 48.
Right, exactly.
The idea of being expelled from Palestine. And I thought, well, there's a topic here. There's something to be researched. So we looked some more through that box that he found, and we found several more petitions, letters and petitions, very similar to the Monterrey one, but from Haiti, from Nicaragua, from El Salvador, Honduras, Chile, Costa Rica, many other places in Latin America and the Caribbean, demanding a right of return, demanding nationality from the British, and asking for help from the Arab executive in Jerusalem, specifically Musa Kadhim al-Husseini, who was the head of the nationalist movement.
What year are you talking about? The most of these were coming from? They were
26, 7, 8 onwards, okay, but mostly 26 and 27.
That was after that 1925 citizenship law.
Absolutely,
yeah,
absolutely. Okay. So sitting there in Jerusalem, finding these documents, I said, well, my friend and I said, well, we've done a lot of secondary research on Palestine. We've seen the history books on Palestine. This has never been written about. Mm-hmm. So that was the birth of my dissertation topic. And the next year I went to England, to London, to the National Archives outside London to find out what it was that was taking place legally, or at least within the colonial archives of Britain, to justify or to exclude so many Palestinians who were living abroad from nationality. And that's when I found out about the 1925 Citizenship Order in Council. It was the law that Britain put in place in 1925 to create Palestinian citizenship and nationality.
And to control it too.
Yes,
really.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. To decide who receives it, who doesn't, to populate Palestine with whatever population Britain wished for. That means that the 400 years of Ottoman history, of Ottomanhood, Ottoman subjecthood that Palestinians are part of, were obsolete, rendered obsolete with the Treaty of Sèvres, where the Ottomans, or at this point the Turkish Republic, relinquished all authority over former subjects of its empire, including all subjects of the Eastern Mediterranean, the Arab world, Greater Syria. So they were effectively without nationality until the 1925 Citizenship Order in Council, which promulgated Palestinian nationality globally, making sort of belonging to Palestine a legal category. Right. It's now confirmable through a document. It's confirmable through laws, through the Treaty of Lausanne, through the Paris Peace Conference, through the Treaty of Sèvres, and through the law itself.
And that was all the post-World War I treaties. right?
Absolutely. So this is part of that legacy of the Balfour Declaration. So the Balfour Declaration of 1917, yes, promises Palestine to the Zionist Federation of Britain and Ireland. But what it also does is it includes in the text of the Mandate of Palestine, right? So the document that the British produce in 1920 to explain and to detail how the governance of Palestine will be carried out, that guarantees that promise will be featured and will have a prominent place in the governance of Palestine, right? So one of the main articles of the Mandate for Palestine, the text that the British authored in 1920, was to facilitate the naturalization of Jews as citizens and nationals of Palestine.
And there we go.
So it was written into the governance into the document that would lay the groundwork for how Palestine would be governed for 30 years, that a big part of that would be to facilitate the naturalization of Jewish naturalization and nationalization in Palestine. Therefore, that's what the Palestine Citizenship Order and Council was meant to do. Right. Was to
give priority to them.
Give priority to them, absolutely. Establish a law, a legal foundation for why nationality would be conferred upon the Jewish immigrants or settlers to Palestine over any other group.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So, of course, they were stuck with the local population of non-Jewish Palestinians, so they had to extend it to them too. They were there. They were born there, right? So, but then there was this large population of Palestinian migrants who lived abroad, and they'd been leaving for decades before, along with Lebanese, Syrians. They'd just been, going back and forth, sending money back, bringing remittances, making their wealth in the Americas, like any old community from the Mediterranean was at the time. The Italians, the Spaniards, the Greeks, the Armenians, the Turks. Everyone was rushing to the New World to make money and bringing it back.
Right.
But contrary to all the other communities in the region who could maintain this legal connection with the homeland, Palestinians were the only community, as far as I know, to be banned from return as Palestinians. They could apply for for visas to visit their homelands and where they and their parents were born as visitors, and if they qualified for visas under whatever visa regime, but they couldn't go back legally as Palestinians and sort of acquire rights to the land, to the place as Palestinians, which means they lost inheritance rights, they lost the rights to employment, they lost rights to property, most importantly, right? So all of this was part of what it means to establish a Jewish state in place of the Palestinians, right?
Well, I mean, when I was reading that, I was also reading Edward Said's The Politics of Dispossession. And I was thinking about, you were talking about basically two different mindsets. Like the Palestinians before that had not really thought in the nation state mindset, where the Zionists coming in my mind, had a clearly set ideology already established. They had a clear plan. It coincided with the nation-state plans that were already being implemented in the region, that sort of thing. So identity in this case has come about as a form of resistance almost to something that was coming in, even before 1925, 1917.
Yes.
It goes back further.
Before 1917 as well.
Yeah.
So it's as you said, it's a long history.
Yeah.
It's long, and it's not in any way immutable. It actually continues to change, and like any identity, especially national identities, right? They are fluid. They are changing. They respond.
Yes. And that was a theme in your book too.
They respond to external forces and internal forces. So, for example, at the turn of the 20th century, with the Ottomans, with the Ottoman Empire and Ottoman identity slowly crumbling, Palestinians in Palestine, abroad, in the Americas, at the time they were considered Ottoman subjects of Greater Syria, right? Bilad al-Sham. They were Southern Syrians, right?
Right.
They were also Arabs, because we had the Arab Nahda movement, the revival of the Renaissance, the Arab Renaissance movement that started in the late 19th century, which was creating a collective identity for the region based around a shared Arab heritage and past and language. So they were at once Arabs, they were Syrians, they were Ottomans, and for some they were Palestinians, right? Because the geography, the land, had always been known as Palestine. So Similarly for the Lebanese. Lebanon is a geographic region of the western portion of Greater Syria. It's a mountain range and a coastal range connected to that mountain. The people there are Syrians. The people there are also Lebanese. The people there are also Arabs. The people, so these categories didn't need to be delineated yet until the Ottomans were on the way out and the British and the French were on the way in because of these this is, the argument I make in the book, because of this forced imposition of these legal national categories that you're a Lebanese, you're a Syrian, you're Palestinian, you're Transjordanian at the time. Like these divisions were what cemented the idea that there is no such thing as a Syrian anymore, or as a Syrian from Greater Syria. Now Syria is what we know Syria to be today, right? So it obliterates the idea that there's a collective identity that's unique to the region and that's different. That's not just Arab. It's also Eastern Mediterranean, Levantine, Greater Syrian, right? Shami, or from Bilad al-Sham.
Right.
So what happens, I think, for the Palestinians over any other group is that they really needed to wrestle with what it means to be Palestinian and to demand to be recognized as Palestinian, as opposed to any other group who didn't have to put up such a fight. Right, the French and the French were not at odds with the population of Lebanese and Syrians, whether in Lebanon and Syria or abroad. The hundreds of thousands of Lebanese and Syrians across Latin America. They extended citizenship to them. They told them, "Here you are, your passports now as French subjects of Lebanon, or of French Lebanon, right, or French Syria." They wanted these populations of educated, global Lebanese and Syrians to repopulate Syria and Lebanon. They wanted that kind of elite Lebanese and Syrian to return to the mandates of Lebanon and Syria as legal subjects of the French mandate. The British had another plan in mind. They were going to populate Palestine with Jews, and therefore there was no place for all those people who had immigrated from Palestine as Ottomans and would want to come back as Palestinians. So their excuses for their reasonings for telling them they do not qualify for Palestinian citizenship is because they left as Ottomans and therefore have no claim to Palestinianhood as former Ottoman subjects. They should therefore go to the Turkish consulates across the Americas, not to the British consulates. Of course, this was against the laws that the British were writing and signing themselves, especially the Treaty of Lausanne, which said that subjects of former territories now under the control of Britain and France come under the responsibility of Britain and France.
Right.
So Palestinians before the mandate would have decided, would have had conversations, and there's evidence of this that whether in newspapers and different outlets across Latin America or in the region, we're discussing what does it mean to be Syrian? What does it mean to be Palestinian?
Right.
Should we say we're Syrian? Should we say we're Ottoman? Should we say we're Palestinian? The consensus based on, well, of course, the newspapers also have an agenda, right? So the much of the press in the region in the Middle East was still aiming towards unity, right? So saying like, let us not differentiate amongst ourselves as Syrian, Palestinian, Lebanese in order to, because it divides the hearts and souls. Let us refer to ourselves as Ottomans. And if we must, Ottoman Syrians, right? But if you say you're Palestinian, that means you're, right, separating yourself from this larger collective. Because when you think, the importance about these years of the World War I years, 1914 to 1918, is that the largest collective political movement in the region was Arabism, right? Mm-hmm. It was a united Arab kingdom of Syria, with Palestine as its southern province, not as a severed section of it, not as a separated section. Lebanon was its western province. Palestine was its southern province. The dream of the Arabs, which included all the Syrians of the region, all the Lebanese and Palestinians and Transjordanians, was a united kingdom, with King Faisal as emir or prince, with Emir Faisal as king of this kingdom. If speaking in any other language that divided this nation, this kingdom, was seen as counterproductive and a threat to unity, right? Which is what the British and the French wanted. So speaking as a collective was actually considered anti-colonial as well, right? It was like it was.
Well, it kind of still is in some ways.
It still is, right? But then the Palestinians, in order to maintain their claims to the land, to property, to inheritance, to the land of Palestine after 1925, had to speak in terms of them being Palestinians exclusively.
Yeah.
To not be dismissed as simply Syrian or former Ottoman or Arab, right?
So it all comes back to the land, basically, is what you're saying.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Connections to the land.
Because you said, too, like a key statement that I caught was the return need not be literal. Like you don't actually need to come back, but you still want that identity. But do you think that was mostly economic? Was that mostly an issue of justice, or did it vary among people? Because the people that were abroad in the diaspora were there for economic reasons, and a lot of them, it seemed like they were doing fairly well.
Very well.
What was the passion to reclaim the land? You know, what was it? If you're doing so well somewhere else, and you might even be doing worse if you go back.
Absolutely.
Why would you want to go back?
So this is the nuance to the argument of the book. It's that it wasn't necessarily a demand for a right to return. It was a right to continue to live the life they were living as merchants and traders who come back and forth, who travel back and forth, but with legal connection to the land. Correct. So yes, it is about the land. And because severing that legal connection, making them foreign to Palestine, as I was saying earlier, means that they no longer have rights to inheritance, to property. To inheritance and property is really what it is, and that therefore they can't extend that inheritance and property to their kids, which is really, I mean, if you look at diaspora histories of any migrant communities anywhere, especially in the Americas, North and South America, the Irish, the Italians, whichever group we're speaking of, that connection to the homeland is so crucial, whether in terms of sending remittances, just literal bags of money back home, so that your family, your network, your community can thrive based on the wealth you're amassing in the diaspora, or so that you yourself can one day come home and retire. For example, many of them didn't want to stay abroad forever. They wanted to make enough money, start their families abroad, and then come back with that wealth in order to retire, build a family home in the motherland, and retire there. Many did that up until the 20s. If you couldn't come back and live on that property as a rightful owner of that property because it was stripped of you by a law that was meant to protect your connection to that land. That's the irony of right. That then it was such a clear injustice that something had to be said.
Yeah,
that's right. So what you see is many of them were denied. All of them, in fact, were denied, apart from a few, were denied that citizenship. But you don't see a continuation of the struggle after a few appeals, right? They're not, the Palestinians aren't rising in arms and going and, starting uprisings in Chile or in Honduras or wherever they are in the 20s and 30s in response to British exclusionary policies. They're demanding rights, they're demanding redress, they're demanding Britain abide by its laws.
Right.
And respect the rights of Palestinians to their nationality. But in the end, the community survives and thrives. It wasn't a threat to their viability as a community in the diaspora. They could still work. They could still create their livelihoods. They could still thrive. And they did. And a lot of that money still returned to Palestine. So many neighborhoods in Palestine today, especially in Bethlehem and Ramallah, were built by diaspora money from that time period. It's just that legal connection, the ability to return as Palestinians and stay as Palestinians, not as tourists. Not as, in similar ways to what we live today, right? Me as a Palestinian-Jordanian, I can access Palestine on my U.S. passport as a U.S. tourist to Palestine.
Which is so ironic.
My family's connection to Palestine is not acknowledged.
Well, I was going to tie that. I was actually going to bring your family up next and ask bring it to the present. How did it affect your own family? You know, I mean, I know that gets into issues of Jordanian identity too, but I mean, just what was kind of the path of your own family with all that?
So my family has a much more of a 48-67 story than a pre-48 story. From what we know, we don't have relatives. We know that we have some relatives who went to South America in the early 20th century, so before 48.
For work reasons?
For work reasons, absolutely. Okay. More distant relatives, but the immediate family was in Palestine. This is my mother's family in 48, and they fled to Egypt in the lead up to May 1948, I believe. My great-grandmother, my great-grandfather had already passed, went to Cairo in 1948, in April 1948. And so my great-grandmother and my grandparents, and so my mother and her siblings were all born in Egypt. My father's family, being originally from Karak, here on let's say the east bank of the Jordan River in Jordan, prior to 48, had gone to Palestine for work. My grandfather was working for the Arab Legion as a civil servant for the Arab Army, and he was stationed in Bethlehem by British forces. And so my father and almost all of his siblings were born in Bethlehem. My father therefore grew up in Bethlehem and Beit Jala, and came to Jordan after 1975. So he lived, my Jordanian father with the Jordanian last name and history, Karak, from Karak, it's very much a city on the eastern side of, the Jordan River, actually has, an upbringing that's very Palestinian in many ways, right? He also was a student in Palestinian universities and schools. He suffered Israeli occupation, as many Palestinians did as well, between 67 and I believe he came to Jordan in 75. So for about almost 10 years, he lived that occupation in Bethlehem and Jerusalem. So when my father and his siblings came, and my grandmother, my grandfather as well, actually, he died in 1980. But when they all came to Jordan, it was a return for them. It wasn't. They didn't come as refugees. So that's a very specific and unique story in the Palestinian narrative in Jordan.
But it wasn't separated either.
But it wasn't separated is the point. Before 48 and 67, absolutely. So for my grandfather to have gone to Palestine, and I believe it was 45 or 46, to Bethlehem and to work and to start a family with my grandmother, that wasn't uncommon at all. The kind of back and forth across the banks of the Jordan River was very common. For centuries, Saltis and Nabilsis, so folks from Al-Salt and folks from Nablus, Salt and Nablus were considered sister towns or twin cities just across the river from one another, across the Jordan Valley. Similarly, Madaba and Jerusalem, or Karak and Bethlehem, or Karak and Khalil, Hebron, right? So these East Bank, West Bank relations were severed first in 48 and then in 67. Of course, the West Bank was annexed to Jordan between 48 and 67, so the East-West Bank travel was still possible. So really, 67 is what severs, is what turns the river into a border.
Right.
And not just sort of a natural part of the landscape.
Right.
It's now a dividing, a militarized border. But what I found really fascinating about this Palestinian diaspora identity was going to Chile and finding meeting generations of Palestinians whose ancestors had arrived over 100 years ago, who still identify fiercely as Palestinian, even though they don't speak a word of Arabic. They're fully Latinized. They speak, just broken English and maybe Assalamu alaikum kif halak, that kind of thing.
Well,
but they have no doubt of their Palestinianness.
Yeah, but the thing is, see, in that case, then that brings up one of the questions I wanted to ask, because their economic ties now are basically all in Chile. I mean, really, right? If it goes back generations, would they have any inheritance hope in Palestine at this point? I mean, so what?
None.
What motivates their Palestinian identity to remain so passionate? In my own family too, actually,
Right.
we have both sides of my family are German, but my mother's side of the family has a lot of Jewish German history too. But the way we look at the Jewish part of our history is, it would be more from a spiritual faith perspective. It would certainly not be Zionistic, So what in this case, is it a justice issue for these people, or what motivates them so heavily?
I was going to say justice.
Yeah.
But I would also say it's also a Christian narrative as well.
Oh, interesting.
There's the largest proportion of Christians outside of Palestine is in Chile, right? It's the largest community of Palestinians outside of the Holy Land, whether here or in Palestine, is in Chile. And so there's a very large proportion of Bethlehemites and Beit Jalis and Beit Sahuris, like the Christian towns, the historically Christian towns of Palestine. A lot of those families were recreated in the diaspora in Chile. So for them, and there's been some work done on this, including a short documentary about the importance for this community to feel that they are the true descendants of Jesus Christ, that they, as Palestinian Christians, must carry the Christian identity, must remain attached to the Palestinianness of being the first Christians, right? It's not just that they're, that they're the first Christians,
or whatever. Yeah.
It's that they are Palestinians and Christians and very connected to the narrative of the Bible, right? So saving the Palestinian identity of Christianity by speaking of oneself as Palestinian and Christian. This is something, of course, this is not across the board. Many, and if not most, are secular or believe first and foremost in an end to the occupation and in the justice issue behind remaining attached to that identity. The other thing, especially about Chile, is that the Palestinian community there is thriving economically and has been for decades. So with the Palestinian, with the community's sort of, let's say, local, clout, political, economic significance, and with a lot of still connection to Palestine through different initiatives, cultural initiatives, or for example, the Club Palestino, the football or the soccer club, one of the main soccer clubs of Chile is called the Club Palestino. It was established in 1920. It's still funded by the Bank of Palestine to this day. So there are, even though Palestinians in Chile don't technically have any claims to lands and properties in Palestine under Israeli occupation, they have still these connections, whether they're cultural or financial, spiritual, absolutely. So a big part of being a successful migrant community is showing that attachment to the homeland still.
Yeah.
Especially when it's continually under threat, and within the Palestinian, of course, there's a threat to the entirety of the Palestinian population in Palestine. But for Christian Palestinians, the fear of disappearing as a minority, as a dwindling minority, as a dwindling community of just a few 100,000 more, that fear is real, and it's real for especially those abroad who can speak of themselves as Christian Palestinians, right? So it becomes also about saving the community, taking pride in oneself as a Christian Palestinian, but also saving the community from erasure.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. Just as you were saying that, I was thinking about something too, almost replacing what it means to be a Christian too, in some ways. Because if I could speak like from my own history, I grew up as a Christian Zionist, and the elimination of the Christian Palestinians because of the way they've been dehumanized, the entirety of the Palestinians, by people in the West. It's almost like they want to rewrite what being Christian means in relation to that land. Does that make sense at all?
Absolutely.
Or it's like, because if you look at Christ as coming from the people that you are supporting being eliminated, you got to come up with a different way to identify who the Christians were and how the Christians were in the land. I mean, it's
so you mean
that's
presenting a different Christian narrative to whom, though? To Western Christians mostly, probably.
Yeah, to Western Christians. But I guess you're right, though, not necessarily in the rest of the world either. But the vast majority of Christians in America would still be supporters of Zionism.
Right. I don't think it's just against Palestinian Christians. I think it's Eastern Christianity.
True.
Most of it, right? But also that goes into the history of, I would say, the schism between the Eastern Orthodox and the Roman Catholic Church, and then the Protestant Reformation, and so on. But absolutely, are Coptic Egyptians considered Christians to Westerners, or the Assyrians, Armenians, are these first Christian, the Iraqi Chaldeans, are these Christian communities, the first Christian communities in the world? Are they Christian enough for Western Christianity?
Right. Yeah.
And then which branch of Western Christianity? I think I would say, your average Protestant may not even consider Eastern Orthodoxy, whether in Greece or Russia, to be Christian in the same sense.
Yeah, you're talking about sectarianism a little bit too.
I mean, this is Christian sectarianism.
Yeah, that's true. That's true, but it also, in this situation, though, very much plays into politics too.
Yeah,
I mean, it's.
But I think it also plays into community dynamics and identity politics within the Palestinian community as well, because for many, from my own experience as well, whether from knowing Palestinian Christians or living among them or visiting them in the diaspora, there's a sense that they must define themselves as being outside of the Palestinian struggle, which is largely seen as a Muslim struggle, right? In many senses,
of course,
which is very disappointing.
Reasons. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And if you're struggling for Palestinian liberation, then therefore you are in line with some Islamist thinking or some Islamist political parties and so on. Resistance is seen as Islamic in the context of Palestinian liberation.
Of Hamas. You've been converted to Hamas, basically. Yeah.
And Hamas or its friends,
Right.
Hezbollah, Iran, the Syrian regime, whomever. So I think for many, especially those with that clout we were talking about, there's been an importance, or there's been like an attempt to really distance themselves from that narrative of resistance and to speak about justice in terms of saving the Christian Palestinian population, right? And in terms of speaking on and simply in like the bare bones of justice here, like it's just about land, it's about belonging, it's about saving Christianity in its birthplace, right? So that becomes a liberation narrative for many Christians, Christian Palestinians, in order to not be lumped into the stereotype of being a Hamas supporter or a resistance or an Islamic or an Islamist or in some way a terrorist or so on and so on. Right. So again, this isn't like across the board, but these are phenomena that exist in many communities from the region, not just Christian Palestinians. Right. This tension and this anxiety about assimilating in Christian context and Western context, like the U.S. and Latin America, and part of that is not being labeled as being outside of that community because of political associations with, whatever resistance movements or whatever Islamist movements.
Right.
But at the same time, they would see it as a duty to save the Palestinian cause from Islamism as well. Let us remove it from that Islamic narrative and make it about saving the land, saving where Jesus is from, saving that, right? So it's
even as a Muslim, I don't disagree with that.
Absolutely.
I mean, like, seriously, it needs to be. It's a human issue. It's
a human issue.
Have to do with religion. I mean, religion has been co-opted, and all the religions, because of it, have been actually made to look worse.
Mm-hmm.
Even Judaism, like, separate Judaism from it too. I mean, all of them. Get them out of it, man.
Yeah.
This is like, it doesn't have to do with that.
Zionism is so violent to religion, I think, in that sense.
It's one of the most anti-Semitic ideologies out there, but
it's kidnapped Judaism, absolutely.
How do you see, but see, I think a lot more people are becoming aware of that sort of thing too, more than ever before. Unfortunately, with all the violence around, it's taken that to make people see things. But like, how do you see, with all that in mind, how do you see Palestinian identity now? How has it evolved? How has it changed? In reference to how it was, like what you were talking about, literally 100 years ago, since the citizenship law came up.
Absolutely.
A lot of the language and what the protests, the petitions that you were talking about in the book, is very similar to today.
Yeah.
But in other ways, like the situation has changed so much too. I mean, what does it? I mean, what does it look like today for you? What do you think?
I think one of the things that the Zionists and their allies before them, the British especially, really managed to do well was to cement fragmentation in this region, right? And then the Zionists really just took off with that fragmentation. So with the British and the French initially carved up the region, convincing us we're no longer all from the same region. We are now divided into these legal national categories. And then the Zionists fragmented the historic land of colonized Palestine even more into West Bank, Jerusalem, Gaza, the Golan Heights, 48, and of course the Shatat, the diaspora, the larger diaspora. So I think when we speak today about, and then of course in the diaspora you have the refugee that's registered with UNRWA, right? And then those of us who have acquired other nationalities and so have become Jordanian Palestinian, Lebanese Palestinian, Syrian Palestinian, whatever, French Palestinian, British Palestinian, right? The irony. Palestinian American, of course. Is a very common hyphenated identity, right? So these are not benign hyphenations. These are, so long as we don't have a right to return, so long as we cannot go back as Palestinians to the land of Palestine where our grandparents were born and many of us, our parents were born. These hyphenations are modes of erasure, right? Or modes of denial. So it depends, in the much larger narrative of Palestinian identity from 100 years ago to today. We really, unfortunately, have to be specific about which Palestinian identity are we talking about in different moments, right? The refugee, the Shatat, a diaspora Palestinian who now has another passport. The Palestinian of the West Bank, the Palestinian in Gaza, the Palestinian in 48, who most likely has Israeli citizenship. Which level of that experience are we speaking of? But I think one huge consistency, which you've pointed out 100 years ago to today, is the fact that what it means to be Palestinian is continually being redefined and reasserted and confirmed through its denial. Through the denial of there even being a Palestine, through the denial of there even being a group of people who can claim indigeneity to a land of Palestine, right? Forget the fact that Theodor Herzl, the founder of Zionism, said, "I want Palestine as the homeland for the Jews." Forget the fact that it was the British mandate for Palestine, right? That the British, when they issued passports, they said British Palestine at the top, right? So putting all that aside, the idea that the clear hypocrisy in denying Palestine and empires and Zionists and their friends denying Palestine exists or Palestinians exist. It's the sheer fact of the numbers of Palestinians, whether in the region or in Palestine or across the world, who have literal legal rights to that land based on laws produced and promulgated in Europe by those same powers. Right?
Which, by the way, to remind everyone, they've never gone away. Those laws are still there. You still have the right.
The Treaty of Lausanne, for example, of 1924, dictates how you qualify for a nationality of a territory or a nation or a nation state at that point, the birth of the nation states. It is through birth on that land, through you yourself being born on that land, or being a descendant of men, of course, it's patrilineal, of fathers or grandfathers or great-grandfathers, it's usually within 3 generations, who have been born on that land, or through a certain number of years of residency on that land. So for almost all of us in the world who can claim any level of Palestinianness, by that law, by virtue of the Treaty of Lausanne, to which Britain was a signatory, we have rights to be Palestinian nationals, to be considered Palestinian nationals anywhere we are in the world, and irrespective of what other nationality we carry.
Right.
You can be an Irish person and an American person. You can be a German person and a Brazilian person. You can be a Palestinian person and a Jordanian person. You can be, right? So it's just about Israel.
Right.
Recognizing that right and abiding by international law.
But I wrote when I was writing about Edward Said's book, The Politics of Dispossession, that I'm not saying this is a bad thing either, but like the Palestinian national ideas were in a lot of ways a reaction to Zionism. But it's also true that you're talking about an entire culture too. But the coalescence of that identity was around. It seemed like a form of resistance in some ways, because your identity was there before, but it was a mixture of other identities. But then the identity came up as a justice issue in relation to something that was coming in, and in the future, I mean, I don't see Zionism lasting, because historically, if you look at those kind of authoritarian, violent movements, they have a lifespan.
They do,
and at some point they will go away. And then the Palestinian identity, what does it look like after that too?
Yeah,
it's interesting to think about that. Does it kind of merge back into to more of a broader pan-Arab identity? Or, you know what I mean?
I don't think it'll ever. Well, actually, after Gaza, after the genocide, I wonder what Arabism will mean.
Right.
For the Palestinians, especially. Right.
Yeah.
But historically speaking, Palestine and Palestinianness was never seen as antithetical or incongruous with Arabism. It was it was within Arabism.
Of course.
Same with Syrianism and Lebaneseness, or these words we have to create to make the sentences work.
Imposed. Yeah.
But I think for many scholars of Palestine, what it means to be Palestinian, wherever you are, has largely been defined by Nakba. What 48 has signified for Palestinians: dispossession, exile, slaughter, massacre. And ongoing Nakba. The idea that the catastrophe of 48 hasn't ended. The idea that genocide in Gaza today is the apex, or is the inevitable ending of Zionism. Zionism will not end until it carries out full genocide, because that's what Nakba is. It's erasing us. It's genociding us. It's right. So it's the logical end to the end of Zionism. However, what my book offers is that Nakba, it didn't start in 48. The forced expulsion, the forced exclusion, the forced distancing of Palestinians from the land started 30 years prior. So that same category of Nakba can still define the Palestinian experience, but it didn't start in 48. It started earlier. And therefore, in 48, what Israel managed to do was just continue a legacy that the British had in place for. There was precedence for 48, right? There was legal precedence for distancing Palestinians and keeping them in refugee camps and forgetting about their plight and not worrying, sort of treating them as outside of international law, not applying international law to Palestinians, predated 48. But at this point, I think what it means to be Palestinian in the world is about more than Palestinians themselves, and it's about more than Nakba. It's about injustice. Period.
Exactly. That's how I see it. Yeah. It ties you to other groups too that are also experiencing it. Absolutely. Especially now, I see it like in America too. Like, that's why so many people are identifying with it there.
Yeah, absolutely. What it means to be Palestinian today is anti-fascist. It's anti-capitalist. It's anti-military industrial complex. It's it's pro-environment.
Anti-colonialism.
It's pro-civil rights. It's anti-colonialism. Absolutely. It's, there's a socialist tinge to it too, depending on who you're talking to. There's an anarchist tinge to it, depending who, right? It's, it transcends Palestinians in this beautiful way, but it also, unfortunately, to some extent, continues to rely on Palestinian suffering, right?
Right, it does.
So long as there are Palestinians being genocided and starved and exiled and expelled, so long as that injustice continues, then there will always be a Palestine, whether it's literal or not, right? Back to that initial point. But of course, it's not just about the Palestinians. There are indigenous communities or communities under oppression all over the world. It's just that the blatant, the very obvious, maybe the televised nature of the erasure of the Palestinians, of this injustice, is such an assault on humanity, and the sheer denial of this erasure, the way Israel and its supporters are doing, it's such an affront on our basic intelligence, on what we're seeing.
Right. Oh, I know.
Right. So long as this is the mode of erasing this indigenous community, I don't think Palestinianness is going anywhere. I mean, speaking historically, Palestinians have never had a nation state of their own, nor have they really asked for one.
They didn't want that identity.
They never needed
the nation state. They didn't want that.
Exactly. They never needed the state attached to what it means to be the nation of, right? Nationhood being just peoplehood. As a collective, we are Palestinians, but we are also Arabs, we're also Syrians, and so on. And then a state purporting to speak on your behalf and creating borders and armies and on your behalf. Why? Yeah. Right. So Palestinians have never sought that, possibly because, well, for centuries it didn't seem necessary until European imperialism was imposed on them, but also because in such a diverse and ethnically, religiously diverse and rich land, to put one power to speak on, any one of those right. faith groups or ethnic groups is a recipe for disaster, right? So, so perhaps the Ottoman model of ruling through diversity, right? As a multi-ethnic, multi-religious land, we will govern this section of Palestine as a mutasarrifat, or Jerusalem being governed a little bit differently from the way Nablus is governed, from the way Akka is governed, right? Because these regions are so economically and religiously and culturally and topographically very different. Jerusalem being the hub of the three monotheistic faiths, it cannot be ruled by any one of them. It shouldn't. It should always be an international zone, which is how it was governed for centuries before the Zionists. Or Akka and the coastal part of Palestine being governed as economically and historically part of like a Beirut governorate, right? Because it's much closer to historically and culturally as a port city to Beirut than it is to Jerusalem or Nablus, which are mountainous regions, dry climates, and culturally much more similar than they are to the coastal regions. So I would say restoring the diversity of the region, the natural diversity of the region, whether climactic or religious or ethnic, to the region. Let the region heal and return to what it, how it had been governed and how it had understood itself without these borders, without these forced divisions and random demarcations, right? What does that look like? What does healing from not just Nakba, but from 100 years war on Palestine and the region as a whole? What could that look like? I sometimes think, well, let's maybe the answer doesn't need to be a return to empire in the way the Ottomans did it, but maybe it could be something built on what exists now in some of the contexts we have in the region. When you look at Jordan, it is incredibly impressive what this state has managed to do since its birth.
It's
right?
true.
It's absolutely, given everything around us.
Yeah.
We have, alhamdulillah, made it this far in a very impressive way and against all odds, I would say. But I'm often inspired by the idea of what Arabism could have looked like if it got the chance, if it wasn't imperialized and colonized by the West. Could we have achieved something akin to the European Union? Could there be a federation of Arab states with open borders, and each state having its own sort of governing structure, whether a monarchy, whether a republic, whether, the Lebanese model of a national pact, or, what does this look like if we first and foremost remove fragmentation, remove forced fragmentation.
If you got Zionism and imperialism out of
the way,
I think it would be a lot different than even the European situation, because there is a lot more similarity in the culture, in the same religion or the same language. First of all, that's a big deal. You got how many languages in Europe,
right?
And I think those open borders would eventually just kind of, I don't know. It's hard to say, but there's a lot of history with states too. But maybe at some point the state idea would kind of almost go away.
Would just kind
of unite. But not that that's a bad thing. I'm not saying it would be bloody and revolutionary. I think it would just be, people would unite more. Maybe Pan-Arabism could happen if there wasn't so much resistance to it. But
right, it could be a return to Syrianism as something unique to this region of the Arab world, right? Pan-Syrianism, but again, you've had for the last few decades a very different definition of Syria under the Assad regimes, and now with the mess in Syria, what does this term come to signify? And for many, what's happening in Syria is an extension of Zionism, right? And U.S. imperialism. So over the last year, so. It might have to be something new, a new category altogether.
Right. Yeah.
But
that's the way things work.
That's the way things work. But I am inspired by the idea, this just to go back to, history, the Palestinians having never had a nation state of their own, never had an army of their own, never had, before 1994 and the PA in Ramallah, never had sort of a governing body speaking on their behalf, is something very inspiring, because in spite of never having had that, we have never not known ourselves to be from the land of Palestine or to identify in one way or another as Palestinian.
I know.
So we will never not.
Right.
In the future, even if there is never a Palestinian state, even if liberation comes in, with a new form of ideology or dogma or a new occupier or a new whatever it is, who and what we are as a people, so long it is under oppression, occupation, or constantly being denied, we will always know we're Palestinian. Wherever we are, whatever passport we carry in our hands.
It's incredibly unique because of the way it was formed in the first place with the nation state thing, and there's never been anything like it in the sense that it's so visible, and not just now, but throughout the 20th century. It's There's might have been movements like that in the past. Even the Native Americans, if they'd had today's technology, what would that have looked like in comparison? But it's like, man, this particular situation has just been, for lack of a better word, the perfect example of fighting against colonialism and everything that you talked about. And it's it's inspiring to a lot of people too at the same time. So I'm always an optimist. I think it's going to turn out for the best, but it's not going to be a pretty picture getting there.
Exactly.
So,
Exactly. We unfortunately are constantly say it's going to get worse before it gets any better.
Yeah, it will, unfortunately. But yeah. Well, there could be a part 2 to this discussion, I think. Are you going to write another book at some point? Are you planning that?
Currently, I'm just trying to stay afloat. Doing a lot of work for the journal and writing sometimes as well, just short pieces and essays, reflective essays. I haven't started on another book project yet, but if I were to really dream of another book, it would be outside of the archives. It would not be, I would not need to write against narratives that erase us. It would be going back to that initial goal of writing our stories.
Okay.
So, I've always loved historical fiction. and
So like collecting stories and
collecting stories and writing them and imagining parts of them, right? Because as a colonized people, we have a lot of, as I was saying earlier, a lot of our record has been erased or stolen. So filling in those gaps with whether it's oral history traditions or imagined histories is actually a form of reclaiming our narrative through fantasy, through imagination, through dreaming, and that's a form of resistance in many ways as well, right?
Of course it is. Yeah.
If you look at Isabella Hamad, she's a Palestinian writer who's written a story of her great grandfather from Nablus, but she's written it as a bestseller. It's called The Parisian.
Okay. Yeah, I've heard of that book.
It's phenomenal, and she pieced together the story of her great grandfather by also filling in the gaps, imagining his life in this beautiful way that not only makes you feel that you were there in the 1920s Palestine at these protests or in these, different instances where he's falling in love or he's communicating with this person or that person, or he's fighting this struggle, or he's getting this job or that job, or visiting this town or this village, but it also, as Palestinians, gives you a confirmation that you and your ancestors were on that land. You were there. You whether that conversation actually took place or not is beside the point. Whether that one incident that she describes on that one page is actually right. So it's the notion of liberating our narrative, Palestinian narrative, from the imperative of evidentiary of source-based evidence. Right? Why can't our imagination be enough? Of evidence that we were there and that we lived on that land.
But you're telling about the life how it was. It's not inaccurate. It's like myth is kind of a summary of the truth.
Absolutely.
Really, So yeah.
So I'd like to look into historical fiction. Actually, if I could just imagine what my grandparents and great grandparents were living and what they were doing in Jerusalem when they built their home, or what my grandparents from Karak were thinking and doing in the 40s when they decided to pack up and move to Bethlehem. I want to write those stories, and it's not impossible. I mean, it would just take time, but I also have to, in a way, decolonize my own mind. And I did get my PhD in the West from a U.S. university, and I do believe in the power of the archive, right? So I need to resist this urge to go find documents to prove that this and this happened, right?
I don't think it's going to be a problem for you, given what I've seen so far. And I, for one, am looking forward to reading it. Nadim, thank you so much. We've been talking to Nadim Bawalsa. He's the author of Transnational Palestine, Migration and the Right of Return Before 1948. It was published back in 2022 by Stanford University Press. But the history of the Nakba, or catastrophe, which is the dispossession of Palestinians from their land, traditionally dated to 1948, goes back long before that, long before the founding of the State of Israel. That's the argument of this book, and its crucial background to the current genocide we're witnessing in Gaza and Palestine generally, and to the start of Palestinian nationalism, which has actually involved a long struggle going back now more than 100 years. Nadim, thank you again for taking the time today. Really appreciate it.
No, thank you, Tim. Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.